not have had the scope and reach without Gar Smith, who got in touch with many of the Berkeley Barb veterans and worked with helping the layout for the website. Judy, who made the Barb what it became. Without them, I wouldn't be standing up here thanking you so much for being here. I want to introduce our first speaker, Trina Robbins, by saying a few words about the Berkeley Barb itself, about its logo, about its satiric implication. I think that Trina's work barbed the establishment in the same way that my father's newspaper barred the establishment, albeit from a feminist perspective, and I think that we are honored to have her here. For all of the stories that surround the inspiration for the logo of the Barb, there is now what is an official narrative about the, what inspired the logo of the Barb. I want to say a few words that my father once told me. He said that once that he was very much inspired by Jose Guadalupe Posada. Jose Guadalupe Posada was the Mexican satirist that you all know. When you look at the Catrinas, the Mexican skeletons that come out during Christmas. But Jose Guadalupe Posada, who was doing his work around the turn of the 20th century, inspired many of the inspired the masses to move against Porfirio Diaz, who he satirized in Mexico. And Jose Luis Posada had a newspaper, interestingly called El Jocote, the bumblebee. Okay, or rather, he worked for a newspaper called El Jocote, which means the bumblebee. Read Barb, read Berkeley Barb, read satire. So it is, it's an interesting sort of counter-narrative to some of the narratives that are given. So how did my father come in contact with Jose Luis Posada? He rode the rails to the West Coast in the early 1940s after an unsuccessful union organizing with cab drivers. He was a young lawyer in Baltimore. He became enchanted by the indigenous cultures that he saw on his way here, which he had never seen before. Political activity in the early 1940s, and a lot of communists, who were there, along with Diego Rivera, Orozco, Siqueiros, and I mentioned them because they were very much influenced by Jose Guadalupe Posada's work. Diego Rivera called him the Goya of Mexico. And this is something that is not known. How did my father know it? He met my mother, Juana Estela Salgado, in Mexico, fell in love with her, married her. She was a young medical student. Unfortunately, she was not able to finish her medical career despite her urging, because at that time, if you got pregnant, which you did get pregnant with my oldest brother, Sergio Scher, she moved in to Siqueiros' mother's house. As a young couple, they both lived in Siqueiros' mother's house. Now, Jose Guadalupe Posada also worked for the Nobel Prize winning Octavio Paz's father on a daily in Mexico City. And my mother was a classmate of Octavio Paz. So my mother was in the middle, her sister studied with Diego Rivera, in the middle of all of this artistic ferment of the time. And when my father went off to the Second World War, she stayed in Mexico and had her first child there. Later I was born, and my brother David Scher born in Miami. And many years later, my half-sisters, Apollinaire Scher and Dove Scher, who unfortunately aren't here. I would love to see them. But that is the background, some of the background, the unofficial background, background not told about what inspired the Berkeley Barb. It comes from this logo, which is, you know, the campanile with its tower turned down. What inspired, first inspired my father. So there is a direct connection, I think, between that jocote, the bumblebee, and the Berkeley Barb. So with those words, I would like to introduce Tina Robbins, as many of you no doubt know. She was involved in the underground comics movement. I came upon her work when I first read in 1970, It Ain't Me, Babe. How many of you remember that? It Ain't Me, Babe, okay. And she then went on to publish a comic book called It Ain't Me, Babe. But there's a long, she's I think a satirist in the best tradition, in the tradition, I will say, of Posadas, who, along with Miguel Covarrubias, who did all of the, you know, inspired the drawings of Josephine Baker in Paris. Trina has produced a comic anthology called Women's Comic, the first of which featured Sandy Comes Out, the first comic strip ever about an outed lesbian. And I say first, I will say first many times, because Trina Robbins is the first in so many ways. In the 80s, she drew Misty for Marvel Comics. In 1986, she drew the DC Comics Legend of Wonder Woman, and became the first woman, there's that word first again, to draw the Wonder Woman comics. In the late 1990s, she produced with Colleen Durham a graphic novel, Wonder Woman, The Once and Future Story, and a piece, which is a piece about spousal abuse. Again, always fighting the good fight, an activist at the core. The list of things that she has done are too many to name in this brief introduction, but let me name a few of her achievements that don't stop with comics. She is a historian of women's cartoonists, the first, again, I underscore that first, who co-authored a book entitled Women and Comics, and then wrote books such as A Century of Women Cartoonists, The Great Women Superheroes, The Girls from Girls, A History of Women's Comics from Teens to Zines, The Great Women, she also wrote The Great Women Cartoonists, Pretty in Ink, North American Women Cartoonists from 1896, there goes that turn of the century, 2013. She has received the Inkpot Award, the Special Achievement Award for the same organization, San Diego's Comic-Con, and for her work, Strip Aids USA. She is the Special John Brusena Hunter Award that she received for comics that I believe were published in Spain, yeah? Yeah. And she's also received the Will Eisner Hall of Fame Award. This is only a partial list of her achievements as a comic strip creator, historian, and activist. She was and continues to be an inspiration for many young women, a Wonder Woman in her own right. Let me introduce Trina Robbins.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm hoping this works like it's supposed to, just forward and back, clicking on it. Yes? Thanks. Whoa, thank you. Nice strong mic. Okay, now we'll find out if it works. Oh, where did it go? It's not on the screen anymore. Got it. Okay, I have to tell you that, whoa, I have to tell you that I'm a little bemused when I was asked to be keynote speaker, because the fact is, I never did anything for the Barb. I worked, so I applauded, I worked on at least 4, maybe 5 other underground newspapers, and I'll be talking about them. But my only connection with the Barb was that Max Scher or someone at the Barb ripped off one of my comics from one of my comic books and published it without asking or without paying me. But that's so Barb. And anyway, now I've been paid. You see, I have a free T-shirt. Okay. This is the, oh, this is, what happened here? Interference. Thank you. Okay, I don't need that. This is the East Village Other. Came out of the Lower East Side, New York in the 60s. The cover is not by me, it's by Art Spiegelman. But I did my first work for the East Village Other. Shouldn't this be moving?
Just stay there a while.
Oh, I have to do it that way. That's not going to come on all the time, will it? Okay, thank you. So I just tap.
So just tap.
Okay, sure. Okay, this is the first thing I did for the East Village Other. And it's kind of a proto-comic because there's only one speech balloon, but it's very filled. 1966. Pretty soon I was drawing for the East Village Other. My comics, in those days, an awful lot of comics didn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. Sometimes it was like you needed to ingest some questionable substances in order to understand it, or at least think you understood it. But one thing was that I truly was, this is also from '66, I really was a classic hippie in that I truly believed in peace and love. And I was not very political. My politics, of course, I marched against the war in Vietnam. We all did. But that's about where my politics ended. I was not very political. This is about the most political comic I ever did. Maybe it's from, oh, let's see, there's a date. Oh, no, I was kidding about the date. The date that I put in there was 1984. I did it in about 68, I guess, 67. When was the whole Chicago? Of course, 68, yeah. So I got this Kid Karma, and he just meditates, and meanwhile there's this woman who has run all the way from Chicago, and the cops are chasing her, and all he does is sit there and meditate. So that was as political as I got. As I say, I truly believed in peace and love. All right, I came to some strange realizations just around 68 or 69, and that was that the guys, and it was still a very small movement, underground comics, that the guys who were doing underground comics were not so much into peace and love, and that because they had no restrictions and were free to just express themselves as much as they wanted, all too often the way they expressed themselves was in the form of very, very vicious and very violent misogyny. And I mean, stuff that I can't show here because this is an all-ages audience. But when I would say to them that rape and torture and murder of women was not funny, they would say, oh, it's just satire, you have no sense of humor. So I'm going to skip forward a couple of years because, oh, no, first I have to show you this. All right, this is a good example. It's not the most horrific example because I can't show the most horrific examples.
Who says?
Okay. Who says? Because it's an all-ages audience, that's why. Okay, this is by Crumb, and he's being interviewed on the radio by Lark Clark, who was a real person, who was in fact a very good friend of mine. And they're talking about the misogyny in his comics. And as you can see, he completely agrees and winds up by strangling her. By the way, as I say, she was a friend of mine, and she's even wearing a dress that I made for her in this. So it's very real, and the misogyny, he admits the misogyny. Despite all the guys who used to defend him and say, oh, it's just satire. So my reaction, I'm going to skip now to 1971. In 1971, Zap Comics was busted for obscenity, and so they asked people to contribute comics to a benefit book to give them money to fight back. So this was my opportunity to talk about how I felt. This is 2 pages. I'm going to let you read it.
Could you read it sometime?
Sure. Okay, it's called, whoops. Presenting that lovable Zap gang, and there they are. I've drawn them as snoids, which is characters that Crumb used to draw. And they're just, aren't we rascals? And he's like, hey fellas, I've got something to say. He's standing on his soapbox. We're outrageous, and they're laughing. And in the background is their club house, which says no girls allowed. We're crazy. And along comes a woman who is kind of, for me, she symbolized me, but she symbolized women. And they're going, hey, do you see what I see? Okay, so one of the snoids grabs her skirt and lifts it up and goes coochie coo, and she gets mad. She says, who gave you nasty kids the right to hang your whole antisocial movement on me? And this was, of course, how I felt, and one of the snoids goes, the nerve! Because a lot of people, a lot of men in those days didn't get it, and they thought criticism was censorship. And you can see they've got her down on the ground and they're yelling, censor, book burner, fascist state, fascist state. And along comes a cop who drags them away, and they go, help! And the woman who is me and all the other women just says, why? Oh, I didn't come to that. That's the 2nd page, sorry. Is it on there?
Yeah.
Okay. So this was how I felt. And as you might imagine, whoops, I just managed to spill water all over everything. Not good. Thank you. So as you can imagine, this did not make me popular with the boys. So,
Listen to the mic, please.
yeah, okay. This is a nice in-between where you can hear me and with no feedback. So this did not make me popular with the boys. And there were not a whole lot yet of male cartoonists. At this point, I was in San Francisco, and everyone knew everyone else. All the male cartoonists knew each other, and used to put out books that they would include each other in, but nobody included me. Nobody asked me into their book. Shortly before that, I had read something in the Berkeley Barb. I was in New York, but the Berkeley Barb reached New York, believe me, and it was all about this thing called women's liberation. If I can get this to work. Oh, no, back. I need help here. Will that bring it back?
Which one did you want?
I want to go all the way back. Back. Yes. Okay. And look at that, it's signed by Gumbo. This was 1969. I read it in the Lower East Side, and I went, wow, women's liberation. And I have been looking for this article for years, because somehow I always, in my memory, I remembered that I had seen it in a New York underground paper, but no, it was the Barb. And there sits Judy Gumbo, who is responsible for my discovery of women's liberation. So like I said, I wasn't popular with the guys. So I came to San Francisco, and no one was inviting me into their books because they were all guys. But the newspapers, the underground newspapers, the word got out that I was in San Francisco, and they phoned and asked me to contribute. So here's the Berkeley Tribe. Again, the cover is not by me. It's by Dave Sheridan and Greg Irons, who I'm sorry to say neither of them are here with us anymore, but they were both really good. And the Tribe, maybe that's the closest I've come to the Barb, because the Tribe was really an offshoot of the Barb. So I was taking the bus. I didn't have a car yet. I was living in San Francisco, taking the bus into Berkeley. And at the time, I was like 7, 8 months pregnant, too, just so that I could draw for the Tribe, because they wanted me. Someone wanted me. And look, it's a women's liberation article that I'm illustrating here. Anybody know where Wendy Schlesinger is?
She's not here today,
But
she's
she
here in
is
Berkeley.
still with us. Okay, thank you, Wendy. All right, it was around this time that I saw the first issue of It Ain't Me Babe, the newspaper. The very first women's liberation newspaper in the country, which I didn't know at the time. I thought it was just first on the West Coast. And I switched newspapers, and now I was taking the bus into Berkeley to draw for It Ain't Me Babe. I did covers. Judy Gumbo has returned the compliment to me by saying that she remembers this cover. I did a number of covers for them, interior illustrations. This is a back cover I did. Angela Davis, as I think you all know, was on the lam at the time. And my fantasy was you put this in the window of your house. You put it in your front window, and there she is in the fog, the collar of her trench coat turned up, hiding from the cops, and she sees the poster, and she knocks on the door, and I invite her in. People did put this up in their windows. It was nice.
What was the date on that one?
1970. Yeah, there's no year, but it was 1970. Okay, so with the moral support of It Ain't Me Babe, the newspaper, I was able to do this. I produced the first all-woman comic ever, the very first. Thank you. Okay, now here's another connection with the Barb, an odd little connection with the Barb. Around this time, actually 1971, this was 1970, John Bryan, who was a friend of mine, and if you know your underground papers, you should know John Bryan, who has been called the father of the underground press, he invited me to dinner. He and his wife Joan invited me to dinner, and they also invited Max and Jane Sher. And Max asked me to, what I like to contribute to, invited me to contribute to the Barb. And I said, yeah, thanks. But then the next week, John and Joan Bryant invited me to dinner again, and this time it was Harry Driggs and his partner Judy from the Good Times. And they asked me if I'd like to contribute to the Good Times. Well, the Barb was in Berkeley, and I was really tired of taking that bus to Berkeley, and the Good Times was in San Francisco, so I chose the Good Times. And I did a continued comic for them with the first African-American heroine, and at this point I was getting pretty political, although it was, real hippie politics, But this is what I did for the Good Times, a continued comic. That's a cover I did for them. And 2 years later, Amy Babe had done very well, and the publisher, Ron Turner, wanted to do another all-woman comic book. And that was Women's Comics. Women's Comics, we talked about things that men didn't talk about in Women's Comics. This is issue number 1. Okay, I was looking to see if we had any other, if I had included any other covers, but I didn't want to bore you with too many covers. But we lasted for 17 issues. We lasted from 1972 to 1992. Which makes it the longest lasting all-woman comic anthology so far, ever. Yes, and for that, for the first issue of Women's Comics, I did Sandy Comes Out, which is the story, really, of my roommate, Sandy, discovering that she's a lesbian. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was the first comic about a lesbian. So there it is, the now infamous comic Sandy Comes Out. Okay, I do have some more covers of women's comics. You can see by the covers that they really. So you can see that this is very much from a woman's point of view. Here's another one by Lynn Mars. And this is one by me, the Disastrous Relationships issue.
Can you read it? I can't read it.
Oh, okay, so this obnoxious boyfriend of hers, who I based on Sylvester Stallone, who I can't stand, he's got his, he's flirting with her girlfriends, and he's saying to her, "Yo, Slowpoke, where's them brews?" And then he says, "Hey, I like your friends," and her dumb friends are giggling. And she's thinking, I just know I can change it. And in case you can't read the label on the beers is Creuse, which is French for hearts. And this is the last issue of Women's Comics. You can see her earrings.
Oh, yeah.
So we dealt with topics that obviously none of the guys would touch with a 10-foot pole. Okay, I'm coming just to a few books that I've done. I don't want to just get you bored with too many book titles. But what happened, okay, this is the first history of women cartoonists. What happened was I got really tired. Whoops, let's go back. What happened was I got really tired of hearing the guys say, "Oh, women never drew comics, women don't draw comics, oh, women don't read comics," and I knew it wasn't true. So I started writing my histories. This one's about girls' comics. This is the Great Women Cartoonists. Oh, go back, not up to Straviz yet. And basically what I discovered, okay, my major discovery really, when researching these books and finding all these wonderful women, is that if you're not written about, you're forgotten. And these women have been forgotten, because when guys write histories of comics, they're interested in Jack Kirby and Spider-Man and the Hulk. They are not the least bit interested in the women who did all these wonderful, and it's not like I have to dredge them up. It's not like, oh, there was a woman once and she drew a comic. These women were prolific, they were successful. Some of them were nationally famous. People collected their work, usually women and girls, cut them out and pasted them in scrapbooks. They were very, very famous and very talented. Okay, now on to just a few things I'm proud of. Strip AIDS USA. This was an AIDS benefit comic. Whoa, make it stop. Thank you. This was an AIDS benefit book that I co-edited with two other cartoonists, one of whom was Bill Sienkiewicz, who was a mainstream cartoonist. The other was Robert Tripto, who was editing gay comics. And so between the three of us, we got representation from the mainstream, from the underground and women, and from the gay cartoonists. We made a lot of money for AIDS-related causes, and it felt really good to do. We got some awards too. And this is Choices. I did this, I actually had to form a publishing company with my partner, Liz Schiller, who was the treasurer of Oakland Now, to publish this, because none of the underground publishers would publish it. It was a pro-choice benefit book for the National Organization for Women, and we did it after the Supreme Court passed what is known as the Webster decision, putting abortion decisions in the hands of the individual states, and we all know how that has turned out. So I'm pretty proud of both of those books. The National Organization for Women gave me a very nice award for publishing it. Okay, my histories of women who the guys never wrote about, and now they're known. They were forgotten, but now they're known because I've written about them. Nell Brinkley, she was a not just national but international star. People collected her work. Girls used to color in her drawings and paste them in scrapbooks, so that sometimes it's hard to find her work because it's all been colored in with crayons. Tarve Mills, who drew the first, and isn't that a sexy cover? This cover was actually a pinup for the boys. This was during the war, and she would get fan mail from the military, and she had prints of these made up and would send it to the boys. But Miss Fury was the first costumed action heroine. She predates Wonder Woman. Gorgeously drawn and wonderfully written. And this is my latest, Pretty in Ink. It's my latest and final history of women cartoonists, because how much can you say about women cartoonists? But there's more. Ah, yes, speaking of histories of women cartoonists, this was a graphic novel that I wrote about Lily Renee, who was a cartoonist during World War II, drew for the comics, drew wonderfully for the comics, but started out as a Jewish refugee, a teenager living in Vienna when the Nazis marched in, who escaped via kinder transport. I'm guessing that most people here have heard of kinder transport, and wound up in the United States drawing comics. And the comics she drew wonderful women, beautiful women fighting the Nazis. So Lily, a refugee from the Nazis, got to fight the Nazis on paper. And she's still with us. She's 94. Okay, back to women's comics. This is 1976. It's an exhibit we have in San Francisco. You can see I'm the second from your left, peering in between two other women. And this is 2012, our 40th anniversary, and there we are again. And Ron Turner now, who was in the back, that illustration, Now he looks like Santa Claus. And I'm still peering in between two of them. Okay, finally, this is coming out in the fall. It's a complete women's comics, a two-volume boxed set. And these are cards about it, which I'm going to be leaving on the table outside. It also includes, it starts with It Ain't Me Babe Comics, the very first all-woman book. And now you can actually own these things and read them without them falling apart in your hands because the paper is so, it's just old newsprint, and every time you touch it, a little piece breaks off. So that is it. That's the complete story of my involvement with the underground and just a tiny little peripheral bit of the Berkeley Barb. So thank you. I don't know, should we have questions? Anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Questions, anybody? Raise your hand, speak loudly.
Trina, that first strip that you wrote about the Zap gang, where was that published?
It was published in a comic book that was a benefit to help pay the court costs for the Zap comics. And you know what? I don't remember the name of it. But I think I can tell really that it was 1971. I can tell what year my work came out. Yes?
Was Melinda Debbie, who then went to England in the 80s and married the graphic novelist Alan Moore, was she part of that group?
Oh, yes. Yes, she joined with issue number 3.
She just got her very first exhibition ever in London.
Oh,
last
that's
year.
wonderful.
Yeah, that's where I.
And about time. Did you see it? Were you
I
there?
did. I met her. She's wonderful.
I know, she's great, isn't
She's
she?
she's putting out a new memoir too.
Oh,
that's
no kidding.
Coming out in England, yeah.
Yeah.
How did you get your wonderful drawing skills? How did you develop as an artist?
I was born with them. You can't learn to draw. I guess you can learn to maybe get better, but you can't if you're not born. There are arts. Singing is another. You have to have the voice to start with. I think writing and dancing is another. You have to have the talent to start with, and then you just do it all your life, and it gets better. I hate to. I've lectured at various art schools, and I see people showing me their work who you can tell by their work they will never be good. They just don't have it. And I get very angry that the art schools will take their money when it's obvious that they'll never be any good. It's certain things you are born with. Yes?
How did you learn about lilies?
Well, I collect old comics, of course, for research. I have tons of old comics, and there was this. They signed their name. They weren't afraid of being women. They weren't afraid that people knew they were women. Although it's true that Lily Renee signed her work L. Renee, but you know, just Renee was a giveaway, wasn't it? And I loved her stories. But I had written about her in my various books, but I thought she was long gone. I'd given up any hope of ever finding her alive. And her daughter contacted me via email. She said that she knew her mother had drawn comics, so she just looked, she Googled her mother, and everything that she came up with was connected to me because I had written about her. So I still thought, when I got the email, I was so excited, I just screamed, but I thought she was dead. I said, what can you tell me about your mother? And she said, well, she can tell you. And she gave me her number, and we've been in contact ever since. I saw her in May. She's 94. She's vibrant, she's brilliant, she's elegant. She's always been very elegant. She's a little sad because all of her contemporaries are dead. And she's alone. And I wish I could be with her every moment, you know, but I'm here and she's there. Yes?
What do you think of the state of comics today, generally, and women in comics today?
Well, it's really amazing. After just going through a terrible, at least a 20, if not 30-year period in which there was nothing, and if you didn't want to draw undergrounds or self-publish your own little small press book, there was nothing but superheroes. And that was, of course, for boys. I would say, since the beginning of the 21st century and more, there are so many women drawing comics now, more women than ever before. And what they are drawing are graphic novels. The advent of the graphic novel has saved the comics industry for women, because they don't have to draw superheroes, they don't have to draw muscular guys bashing each other, They tell real stories, and they're really good, they're really, really talented. Yes?
The Complete Woman's Comics, would that possibly lead to a website where individual books and materials could be obtained?
That's up to my publisher. The publisher is Fantagraphics. They are very good. They have published other books by me. They did the Nell Brinkley book. They are very good. I have total faith in them. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did a website like that, but I don't know. Yes?
Did you have any favorite artists or cartoonists when you were growing up? And also, could you tell us a little bit more about Wonder Woman when you did that?
I was just going to tell you that I loved Wonder Woman when I was growing up.
Trina, repeat the question.
Oh, the question was, can you tell us, who were your favorites when you were growing up? Did you have any favorites, comics? And can you tell us about Wonder Woman? So here I am talking about Wonder Woman because as a kid, I loved Wonder Woman. It was through Wonder Woman that I learned about the Amazons, that I learned that there had been Amazons, an island of beautiful women with no men allowed. And I also, the early Wonder Woman, she used to relate to the goddesses. She would speak to Aphrodite and Athena, and they would speak to her. And this opened me up too, because Judaism was so boring. And obviously I was not interested in Christianity either. A bearded guy in the sky was of no interest to me. And that there could be goddesses, and that in this comic they were real. And it was as though the creator, William Moulton Marston, was giving me permission to believe in something other than that bearded guy in the sky. So that was wonderful for me. Yeah. Yes. You.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, and now, of course, I feel like I must. And I have on my, my T-shirt that I didn't do. It's Laurel Ulrich's T-shirt, so I might as well say something. But first, I want to say, Trina, how much I love your work with us at Ain't Me Big, and I'm thrilled that you got Judy back on the map as the early women's liberationist that she was in the Barb. Jack Jacobson said I was also in the Barb, that I published something which I think was about sexual liberation. I think it was called Sexual Liberation as a Hoax. I'm not sure. Is John around?
Yeah.
Is that what it was called?
Actually, I can't remember the name.
Oh, that's okay. I thought you were more in touch with it than I am. In any case, at some point, I didn't want to say anything at all about, because I knew I was going to be having a wonderful time with everybody, about my concern of real life impact in Berkeley on the Barb, misogyny, pornography, the whole ambiance, because I learned about it in a particular way. I had in the founding of the Women's History Library in 68 and 69 and so forth, through the 70s, interns. And those interns were constantly being attacked, and they were being told that why weren't they, complying or whatever. It wouldn't have certainly been that word. But that's what we thought Berkeley was about, is that you're here waiting for us to come to town and grab at you when you're on your bicycle or in the bus stop or, you know, other kinds of physical attack. And it was an atmosphere that was horrific. And we had a statistic of, in the mid-70s, of having the same rape, stranger rape statistic as Washington DC at the time, which was very, very high for our country. And so people have been saying that the Barb contributed to the rape culture in our country, and it was certainly not the only. We had to have a whole women's liberation action to stop another pornographic left-wing newspaper coming out, which was going to be a money-making spin-off from Dog of the Bay. So it's, you know, as I said, it's not limited to the Barb. But it is something that is real and has affected a lot of human beings for the rest of their lives. And we still have misogyny, as you know. So I'm glad that you spoke to our Crum and, you know, and that situation.
Thank you, Laura. Let's see, okay, you know, sexual liberation, it was great. We had the pill, you know, we could sleep with whoever we wanted without fear of getting pregnant. There was no AIDS in those days. But it is true that too many men thought that if you were sexually liberated, you'd sleep with them, you know, and that if you wouldn't, they got mad at you. They didn't understand that it was our choice. The sex ads in the papers, they all had them, all the underground papers had them. I didn't like them, but I also understood that without them, they'd go under. They needed that money, which is too bad, but it's a fact. Yes, and so women's liberation, the movement, was really needed. Whoa, was really needed. Because up until then, men did not understand. Some guys understood. Okay, is that it?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Okay, I don't know if you're aware, do you live here now?
I live in San Francisco.
Okay, so they may be doing it in San Francisco too, but they're getting rid of books that haven't been checked out for 3
I
years.
read that in today's Chronicle.
So I want to know if your books are here or if they can be put here and kept. And I want to say this, I ride a bike and my basket, I was doing research on health and some of the books were very large. So I would use them maybe in the last 6 months 4 or 5 times. And then I went back after they started removing books. And they didn't have it. So a kind librarian, researcher, he put a search on it, said it hadn't been checked out since 1999. But I have been using that book. And other people, like senior citizens who live in projects around here, they can't carry these heavy weights. Some of them are having trouble. And then there's homeless people that use the library every day, and they have no place to put the books. So this is very wrong, and I want to know if they have your books here, and if they don't, if they'll keep them, and if we could do something about what I just said, because it's really terrible.
Okay, the question was, they're starting to purge books from the libraries. I read this article this morning in the Chronicle, and it's terrible. Of course it's terrible. Libraries are book repositories. And this woman wanted to know if they had my books, and if they did, she hoped they would keep them. I can't speak for Berkeley, but I know the San Francisco Public Library has my books, so I'm going to make a wild guess that the Berkeley Library does too. I'm going to make another wild guess that they are borrowed often enough so that they're not being purged. Yes?
The way books get purchased, I mean, I'm not part of the library, but I know that I've been told many times that you put in a form requesting a book, and if they get enough requests, they will purchase books from the library.
Yes, but they're getting rid of books
Well,
that are
I'm aware
older.
of that.
And also you have to pay 50 cents. See, they were supposed to have parking when they built the library, and if you're a taxpayer, you pay mucho money every year. And so what happened, the little PR guy came every day to these downtown area plan meetings, and he said, when are we getting the parking in the library garden? We never got the parking for the public, not free, not nothing. You can go in there now, but people got to go to the little libraries out in the community, and you can pay 50 cents and they'll ship a book to that library. But how many people are gonna do it? You go to the library and so I'm saying, there's problems and there's a lot of people here and I hope we can stop it because it's totally outrageous.
I can tell you that
Removing history, it's wiping it out, and it's Plan Bay area. If you don't know that, they don't want us to know about that.
librarians are my friend, and librarians are your friend. And anything we can do for the public library, we should do.
Is there anybody in this room who is from the library and can tell us whom to write, what to do next? 'Cause I was here at the rally on Tuesday, and it really is a terrible situation.
The director of the library?
Can I
Okay.
think that my part is over.
Yes.
So I just want to thank you. Get the table out right outside.
All right, don't everyone on the mic so we can.
This is Jeff Finley. Jeff has been wonderful to us. He works for the library, and he's the one who's given us this room, and he has been extremely important, and we could not have held this thing without him. While I understand everyone's concerns, I think Jeff has agreed to talk a little bit about it. It's a little off topic, but I think we should listen to what Jeff has to say, and then continue the conversation one-on-one or in groups or writing to him. And now that I'm delighted to introduce him, Jeff.
All right, thank you. I'm Jeff Finley. I work in the Berkeley History Room here at the Berkeley Library. That was really my focus. That's why I'm involved in this Barb event today, this momentous historical event. I know there's a whole lot of contention about the weeding process here at the library. There is a director of the library, Jeff Scott, not Jeff Finley, that's me. There is a board of library trustees, and there is the city council of the Berkeley Library, or the city of Berkeley. Those are the channels to get your voice heard, and they're used to hearing people's voices. With that, I think I'll turn this back over to Barb.
So it's time for the next panel. Can I ask my panelists to come forward? This panel is a panel of editors, writers, and contributors to the Barb. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Barb and what is in this business spot. All right, I'm delighted. I'm delighted to introduce a panel of experts on the Berkeley Barb. And what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to drop a bunch of pads. That's what I'm going to start with. My name is Judy Gumbo. I love, actually, this is what I learned in the 60s, is to kind of walk around with the microphone and how much fun it is. I want to introduce the people on the panel by name, tell you a little bit about them, and then I'm going to ask them a couple of questions. The reason I brought these pads is because we're all getting older and our memories aren't necessarily good. And so since I'm going to speak for myself, really, Kathy, and since I'm going to ask two questions, but ask each panelist basically to respond in their own manner and fashion to the two questions, I figured you might want to write down the answers. Yes, I even have pens somewhere. So the way it's going to work, this is Michael. We have here a history of Barb staff and writers. So we have Michael Corman, who was here at the very beginning of the Barb. John Jacob, when the Barb was first founded in Jane and Max's house, along with Jim Schreiber, and Michael and Jane really are the only two surviving members of the Barb from that time. This is John Jacobson, who was there in the early days, and then a little bit later, and certainly in the 60s, and when in the late 60s and early, and in '69, when the Barb tribe split took place. This is Leo Lawrence. Now, Leo was a stellar reporter for ABC, KGO, and during the day. That was his day job. His night job was a reporter for the Barb. Leo came out and was very active in the founding. He was actually one of the people basically responsible for the founding of the gay liberation movement before Stonewall, when KGO, and if I get it wrong, you'll correct me, but then KGO fired him for being gay. Kathy, I've known since 1971 or 2, I think. Yes, it is. And I actually first met Kathy down at the Republican and Democratic conventions in Miami in '72, along with her friend Gabrielle. Is Gabrielle here? All right, along with her friend Gabrielle Chang. And they were, at that point, they were hanging out with Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman, who were organizing yippie demonstrations. But then it turns out Kathy moved out here, and she had exactly the same job at the Barb that I had, which was coordinating the classified sex ads, among other jobs. And what I realized from that is that that's probably what that was Max's job definition, right? Women do the coordination of the classified sex ads. I may be wrong, but that's kind of what I picked up. And finally, we have Greg Pascal, who was there at the very last, at the end of the Barb, when in the last issues, and worked with Max, and really was one of the, wrote, I think, an article for the very last issue of the Barb. And Greg has gone on to become really well known. I have it over there, so I can't really tell you. But he's gone on, he's written books, he's worked for the New York Times, he's worked for the Wall Street Journal, he's been called one of the stellar reporters of something or other. So,
No, now it all to the Barb.
and goes it all to the Barb, right. So the thing I'm delighted about this panel is that we really do cover the entire Barb history. So I originally told these wonderful people that I would ask them certain questions. I lied. What I want to do actually now is to ask each one of them a question that is specific to their experience at the Barb, and actually 2 questions specific to their experience at the Barb, and I figured that'll be a good way of us getting a better sense of it. So let me start with Michael. Michael he came from Dun and Bradstreet to become the first advertising and business manager of the Barb, at which he describes himself as being so stiff people thought he was a CIA agent. And he went on in later life to become a successful commercial real estate agent here in Berkeley. So Michael, here are my 2 questions, all right? And I'm happy if you can ask me to remind you what the second one is. And I guess my other question to all the panelists is, do you want a timer? You have about 5 or 6 minutes to start, because what I want to... Well, I'm being more generous. This is how I want to do the panel. I want each one of them to speak, to answer these questions. Then I would like possibly comments from one panelist to the other on what they said, and then obviously open it up to questions, because I think that'll be the most interesting aspect. So I'm going to ask my 2 questions. If you would like me to let you know when you're got 30 seconds or a minute, I'm happy to do that. Okay? All right, so Michael, 2 questions. 1, tell us a little bit about the early days of the Barb, and what can you tell us specifically about Max and his motivations for starting the paper? That's question 1. Question 2 is, I understand you didn't initially approve of sex ads, but you also recognized that sex ads generated revenue. Can you tell us about your first sex ad from a Barb volunteer, a foot fetishist named Dennis? Okay, so question 1. Atmosphere, early days in the Barb. Yeah. And Max.
So Max Sherry used to operate a place on San Pablo Avenue called the Steppenwolf, was a coffee shop with beer and wine and all of that. But kind of, you could tell it, and she had a hangout, which changed on weekends into a rock and roll place. And I would go there just as a customer, but I worked for Dun & Bradstreet. Dun & Bradstreet was a business that investigated other businesses and analyzed them sort of and gave credit ratings. things like that. And I was one of their, this was my territory, and so one day I got a requirement to go check out Steppenwolf. And even though I knew Mac sort of casually as a customer, our conversations changed, because I knew a lot of questions about the business and all that. And in the course of that, in that same time period, I was involved in LA in the Renaissance Pleasure Fair that was beginning. And a friend named Art Pumpkin started the LA Free Press and published it, distributed it at the 1965, I think. Four. Pleasure Fair out in the old Paramount Movie Ranch in Agoura Hills, I think. And that was a serious newspaper. And my conversations with Max, and he knew because I'd gone down there and all, he was interested in all of that. And he had asked me if I would join them in starting a newspaper. And I don't know if he had a name for it at the time. I don't think so. But it was a rather serious endeavor. It was kind of modeled after the, supposed to be, after like the Village Voice and the LA Free Press, which was more of a serious rag. Anyway, so I did eventually. I'm not really sure quite when. I think, I had other employment and I had kids to feed, all of that. So I don't remember when I went to the first, when we put out the first paper. I don't think I was present in laying out the first paper that came out with the train. That was kind of quick, to stop to protest the troop train that came through Berkeley. But so the idea was that Max and I and another person named Jim Schreiber, who was a writer for the Wall Street Journal, and I want to say something. All three of us were born before World War II, and the subsequent Barb is a different generation, really. I mean, the times overcame all of that. The changes, the moral changes that swept the country, or a sense of morality, and after the assassinations and the protests against the war, etc. Anyway, so I joined the Barb with under employment, and business manager soon turned into being the advertising manager, that was revenue, and circulation manager, and layout manager, because you had to lay out the edge. And it was very, very busy. It was kind of always on the run. It was very interesting trying to get support for the Barb from advertisers. And at that time, I had friends like Ronnie Davis in the San Francisco Mind Troop and all. Anyway, in collecting ads, I would go over to the Haight-Ashbury and all places around town, just trying to get ads. Go off into the rock clubs and all that, just collecting posters and things. So it's kind of hard to. The title business manager is kind of maybe in lieu of financial compensation.
Excuse me, whose phone is it that's ringing?
It's off, it's off.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Anyway, it was just pretty frenetic, and volunteers came along and joined. Circulation was basically, we had a stack of papers and would maybe hold somebody's guitar as collateral. We gave them the stack, and when they came back with the money,